40 yards from her front door. That's how close 16-year-old Elaine Doyle was to safety when she disappeared into the darkness. For 25 years, her killer walked freely through the streets of Greenock, Scotland, undetected among the very people searching for him. Tonight, we reveal how a piece of tape from 1986 finally brought a murderer to justice. This is the evidence room. June 14th, 1986. The morning after the World Cup opening ceremony, Alan Stewart received a call he'd never forget. The young Strathclyde police officer checked his code book. Code 44. Murder. He arrived at the small lane off Ardgowan Street within minutes. What he found changed everything. A young woman lay motionless, clothing scattered nearby. No visible injuries from where he stood, but clearly deceased. Alan radioed for backup and secured the scene. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know she lived just 40 yards away. Word spread quickly through Greenock's tight-knit community. Allison, a reporter for the Greenock Telegraph, rushed to the scene. Police had already hung blankets along the fence, shielding the lane from the 4-story tenement windows above. Officers began canvassing immediately. The very first door they knocked on belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Doyle. Their daughter hadn't come home the night before. The clothing description matched. Blue leather jacket, black and white dress. The victim had a name, Elaine Doyle, 16 years old. By all accounts, Elaine was a good kid. She worked at a jewelry store in town, had close friends, and loved going out dancing. On June 13th, she'd gone to the Celtic Club for a disco, calling her mother to say she'd be home around 1 or 1:30 in the morning. When she didn't return, Mrs. Doyle assumed she'd stayed with a friend, something Elaine often did. But when she opened the curtains that Saturday morning and saw the police activity outside, she knew something was terribly wrong. Elaine's father's last words to her had been simple: "Take care of yourself." She had. She'd followed the main roads home, just as he'd always advised. She'd stayed in well-lit areas. She'd done everything right. She was 40 yards from her front door when someone grabbed her and pulled her into the lane beside the Air Training Corps building. The community went into shock. Greenock had its problems: gang violence, assaults, economic decline from the collapse of the shipbuilding industry. But the murder of a 16-year-old girl steps from her home? That was different. Police launched a massive operation. Officers from across Western Scotland flooded the town, knocking on hundreds of doors, interviewing everyone who'd been at the Celtic Club that night. They created a search grid covering Elaine's route from the club through the town center to the West End. Alan Stewart worked the case for 8 months, filling out forms, taking statements, trying to trace every single person who could have been in the area. The scale was overwhelming. Student flats with 20 bedrooms, multiple tenant changes, thousands of potential witnesses. In 1986, DNA testing didn't exist. Forensic science was in its infancy. Investigators collected evidence, clothing, fibers, samples, but had limited ways to analyze it. Witnesses reported seeing a red-haired man running away. Once that description hit the press, tips flooded in. Everyone knew someone with red hair. Most leads went nowhere. Despite the massive effort, police had no suspects, no clear motive, no breakthrough. The Serious Crime Squad from Glasgow took over. At Elaine's funeral, officers sat in the back, watching. Sometimes killers attend their victims' services. He didn't show. Weeks later, Elaine's missing handbag was found burning on library steps across town. The mystery deepened, but the case went cold. 25 years, the Telegraph kept the story alive. Daily coverage became weekly, then monthly, then an annual remembrance. Elaine's gravestone read, "Too good to be forgotten." The investigation scaled down. Resources shifted elsewhere, but the case stayed open. Alan Stewart never forgot. "I had 3 daughters," he said. "I was only a block away from where this happened, and we still didn't know who did it." As the 25th anniversary approached, police made a decision. They would launch Operation Evergreen, a complete cold case review. 40 detectives took over the top floor of Greenock Police Office. Locks changed. Passcodes issued. They read all 14,000 witness statements from the original investigation. And they looked at the evidence with fresh eyes and new technology. Back in 1986, an investigator had pressed sellotape strips against Elaine's body to collect fibers. Standard procedure, but useless at the time. DNA analysis didn't exist. Those tapings had been carefully stored for 25 years. Now, the Operation Evergreen team retested them with modern forensic techniques. They found a DNA sample, the killer's genetic profile. But there was no match in the database. They'd have to do it the old-fashioned way, track down and test every man from the original investigation. Hundreds of men were eliminated. The list grew shorter. Then they came to John Dougherty. In 1986, Dougherty's friend had told police they'd been at the Celtic Club together the night Elaine died. Both were there, at the same place, the same time as Elaine. But John Dougherty himself never came forward, and due to the sheer volume of information, he was never interviewed. He'd slipped through the cracks. By 2011, Dougherty was living a quiet life in Greenock. He had a partner, a young child, and worked as a council driver, a family man. Unremarkable. When detectives knocked on his door, Dougherty was cooperative. He willingly provided a DNA sample, confirmed he'd been at the Celtic Club that night, and showed no concern whatsoever. The sample went for analysis. Days later, the result came back. The investigator read the email twice, then asked a colleague to verify it. 1 in a billion. The odds that it wasn't John Dougherty's DNA on Elaine's body. After 25 years, they had their killer. It felt great to have the suspect, the investigator said. I was totally confident we got the right guy. Nobody on the team had heard of Dougherty. They began digging into his background carefully without showing their hand. They discovered he'd attended school with Elaine's brother. Whether Elaine knew Dougherty personally remains unclear. When they brought him in for questioning, Dougherty claimed to know nothing beyond what he'd read in newspapers. But the DNA didn't lie. And there was something else. The witness. Back in 1986, a witness had given police a description of a man with distinctive staring eyes. 25 years later, he maintained he could still identify that man. From photographs shown during Operation Evergreen, he picked John Dougherty. The DNA evidence and eyewitness testimony together built an airtight case. Dougherty was charged with murder. The public reaction was mixed. Shock that it was a quiet family man. Relief that someone was finally being held accountable. Alan Stewart couldn't believe it. After all this time, he said, I thought perhaps it was somebody who had left town. Well, it turns out he joined the army for a while, but he came back. Many witnesses from 1986 had died. Alan Stewart was first on the stand, describing the scene, the layout, what he'd witnessed that morning 25 years earlier. I was trying to do my best for the family, he said. Throughout the trial, Dougherty showed little emotion. He sat in the dock, never making eye contact with Elaine's family in the gallery. The prosecution focused on the science. Expert witnesses explained the sellotape tapings, the DNA extraction, the analysis. 1 in a billion. The jury heard about Dougherty being at the Celtic Club, about the witness who remembered the staring eyes, about the connection through Elaine's brother. After lengthy deliberations, the verdict came. Guilty. It was the most satisfying result I've ever had in 30 years of police work, one investigator said. There was relief throughout Greenock, justice for Elaine. But questions remained. Justice for her family after a quarter-century of waiting. There was no clear motive, no explanation. Dougherty never spoke about why. Was it random? Opportunistic? Did he know her through her brother? We'll never know. What we do know is this. Without advances in forensic science, there would have been no justice at all. Those sellotape tapings, collected by investigators who couldn't analyze them in 1986, held the key for 25 years. When technology finally caught up, they revealed the truth. Alan Stewart reflected on what the case means. I think there's always someone like John Dougherty out there. You don't know who they are. You don't know what they've done. That violence is always there, and it can flare up at any time. It's a sobering reminder. Evil doesn't always look like we expect. John Dougherty wasn't a monster on the surface. He was ordinary, a council worker, a father, someone you'd pass on the street without a second thought. But forensic evidence doesn't care about appearances. DNA doesn't lie. This case proves that cold cases can be solved, that preserved evidence has value, even decades later, that families deserve answers, no matter how long it takes. Elaine Doyle was 16 years old. She was 40 yards from safety. She'd followed all the rules, done everything right. For 25 years, her killer walked free. But the evidence waited. And when science advanced enough to read its secrets, justice came. The Doyle family waited a generation for closure. That's an unimaginable burden. But they got their answer. This is why we preserve evidence, why we never close murder investigations, why cold case units exist. Because somewhere in those carefully stored samples, the truth is waiting. Greenock can move forward now, knowing the person responsible is behind bars. Elaine's gravestone reads, "Too good to be forgotten." She hasn't been forgotten, not by her family, not by her community, not by the investigators who refuse to give up. This is the evidence room. If this case moved you, hit the like button and subscribe for more true crime investigations. Leave a comment with your thoughts on cold case forensics. Until next time, remember, the evidence never lies. It waits, it endures, and eventually, it speaks.